Jenkins is the powerhouse behind modern software development, streamlining the entire build and deployment process. In this comprehensive course, we will unlock the potential of Jenkins, teaching you how to automate tasks, integrate diverse tools, and orchestrate the software delivery pipeline like a pro. From setting up Jenkins pipelines to managing configurations and scaling for large projects, we will cover it all. Whether you are a seasoned developer looking to boost productivity or a beginner eager to dive into DevOps, then this course will empower you to harness the full potential of Jenkins for efficient and error-free software development. If these are the type of videos you'd like to watch, then hit that subscribe.
Jenkins is a web application that is written in Java, and there are various ways in which you can use and install Jenkins. I have listed popular 3 mechanisms in which Jenkins is usually installed on any system. The topmost one is as a Windows or a Linux-based services. So if at all you have Windows like the way I have, and I'm going to use this mechanism for this demo. So I would download a MSI installer that is specific to Jenkins and install this service. So whenever I install it as a service, it goes ahead and nicely installs all that is required for my Jenkins. And I have a service that can be started or stopped based upon my need. Any flavor of Linux as well. One other way of running Jenkins is downloading this generic war file, and as long as you have JDK installed, you can launch this war file by the command opening up a command prompt or shell prompt if at all you're on Linux box, specifying java-jar and the name of this war file. It typically brings up your web application, and you can continue with your installation. The only thing being, if at all you want to stop using Jenkins, you just go ahead and close this prompt. You either do a Control-C and then bring down this prompt, and your Jenkins server would be down. Other older versions of Jenkins were run popularly using this way, in which you already have a Java-based web server up and running. So you kind of drop in this war file into the root folder or the HTTPD root folder of your web server. So Jenkins would explode and kind of bring up your application. All user credentials or user administration is all taken care of by the Apache or the Tomcat server or the web server on which Jenkins is running. This was a very older way of running, but still some people use it because if they don't want to maintain 2 servers, if they already have a Java web server which it's being nicely maintained and backed up, Jenkins can run attached to it. Alright, so either ways, it doesn't matter however you're going to bring up your Jenkins instance. The way we're going to operate Jenkins is all going to be very same or similar one, with the subtle changes in terms of user administration if at all you're launching it through any other web server which will take care of the user administration. Otherwise, all the commands or all the configuration or the way in which I'm going to run this demo, it is going to be same across any of these installations. Alright, so the prerequisites for running Jenkins, as I mentioned earlier, Jenkins is nothing but a simple web application that's written in Java. So all that it needs is Java, preferably JDK 1.7 or 1.8. 2 GB RAM is the recommended RAM for running Jenkins. And also, like any other open source toolsets, when you install JDK, ensure that you set in the environment variable Java home to point to the right directory. This is something very specific to JDK, but for any other open source tools that you install, there is always a preferred environment variable that you got to set in, which is specific to that particular tool that you're going to use. This is a generic thing that is there for, for any other open source projects, because the way open source projects discover themselves is using this environment variables. So as a general practice or a good practice, always set these environment variables accordingly. So I already have JDK 1.8 installed on my system, but in case you do not, what I would recommend is just navigate on your browser to the Oracle homepage and just type in or search for install JDK 1.8 and navigate to the Oracle homepage. You'll have to accept the license agreement, and there are a bunch of installers that you can pick up based upon the operating system on which you're running. So I have this Windows 64 installer that is already installed and running on my system. So I will not get into the details of downloading this or installing it. Let me show you once I install this, what I've done with regard to my path. So if you get into this environment variables, all right, so I've just set in a Java home variable. If you see this, C:\program files Java JDK 1.8. This is where my Java is located. C program files Java. Okay, so this is the home directory of my JDK. So that is what I've set it up here in my environment variable. So if you see here, this is my Java home. All right, one other thing to do is ensure that in case you want to run Java or JavaC from a command prompt, ensure that you also add that path into this path variable. So if you see this, somewhere I will see, yes, there you go. C colon program files Java JDK 1.8 bin. So with these two, I'll ensure that my Java installation is nice and good enough. So to check that, to double check that or to verify that, let me just open up a simple command prompt. And if I type in Java version, all right, and Java C version. So the compiler is on the path, Java is on the path. And if at all I do this, even the environment variable specific to my Java is installed correctly. So I'm good to go ahead with my Jenkins installation. Now that I have my prerequisites all set for installing Jenkins, let me just go ahead and download Jenkins. So let me open up a browser and say download Jenkins. All right. LTS is nothing but the long-term support. These are all stable versions. Weeklies, I would not recommend that you try these unless until you have a real need for that. Long-term support is good enough. And as I mentioned, there are so many flavors of Jenkins that is available for download. All right. So what I want is, yes, this is the WAR file, which is a generic WAR file that I was talking to you earlier. And this is the Windows MSI installer. So go ahead and download this MSI installer. I already have that downloaded. So let me just open that up. All right, so this is my downloaded Jenkins instance, or rather installer. This is a pretty, maybe a few months old, but this is good enough for me. Before you start Jenkins installation, just be aware of one fact that there is a variable called Jenkins Home. This is where Jenkins would store all this configuration data, jobs, project workspace, and all that specific to Jenkins. So by default, if at all you don't set this to any particular directory, if at all you install an MSI installer, all your installation gets into C colon program files 86 and Jenkins folder. If at all you run a WAR file, depending upon the user ID with which you're running a WAR file, the Jenkins folder, there's a .jenkins folder that gets created inside the user home directory. So in case you have any need wherein you want to back up your Jenkins or you want Jenkins installations to get into some specific directories, go ahead and set this Jenkins home variable accordingly before you even begin your installation. For now, I don't need to do any of these things, so I've already downloaded the installer. Let me just go ahead with the default installation. All right. So this is my Jenkins MSI installer. I don't want to make any changes into the Jenkins configuration. C colon program files is good for me. Yeah, this is where all my destination folder and all the configuration specific to it goes. I'm happy with this. I don't want to change this. I would just say go ahead and click installation. Okay, so what typically happens once the Jenkins installation gets through is it'll start installing itself, and there are some small checks that needs to be done. So, and by default, Jenkins launches on the port 8080. So let me just open up localhost 8080. There's a small checking that will be done as a part of the installation process, wherein I need to type in a hash key. All right. So there's a very, very simple hash key that gets stored out here. So I'll have to just copy this path. If at all you're running as a WAR file, you would see that in your logs. All right. So this is a simple hash key that gets created every time when you do a Jenkins installation. So as a part of the installation, it just asks you to do this. So if that is not correct, it'll crib about it, but this looks good. So it's going ahead. All right. One important part during the installation. So you would need to install some recommended plugins. What happens is the plugins are all related to each other. So it's like the typical RPM kind of a problem where you try to install some plugin and it's got a dependency which is not installed and you get into all those issues. In order to get rid of that, what Jenkins recommends, there's a bunch of plugins that is already recommended. So just go ahead and blindly click that install recommended plugin. So if you see, there is a whole lot of plugins which are bare essential plugins that is required for Jenkins in order to run properly. So Jenkins as a part of the installation would get all these plugins and then install it for you. This is a good combination to kind of begin with. And mind you, at this moment, Jenkins needs lots of bandwidth in terms of network. So in case your network is not so good, few of these plugins would kind of fail. And these plugins are all available on openly or mirrored sites, and sometimes some of them may be down. So do not worry in case some of these plugins kind of fail to install. You'd get an option to kind of retry installing them, but just ensure that at least most or 90-95% of all these plugins are installed without any problems. Let me pause the video here for a minute and then get back once all these plugins are installed. My plugin installation is all good. There was no failures in any of my plugins. So after that, I get to create this first admin user. Again, this is one important point that you got to remember. Give in any username and password, but ensure that you kind of remember that, because it's very hard to get back your username and password in case you forget it. All right, so I'm going to create a very, very simple username and password, something that I can remember. That's my name, and an email ID is kind of optional, but it doesn't allow me to go ahead in case I don't. So I just give in an admin and I got a password. I remember my password. This is my full name. All right, I say save and finish. All right, that kind of completed my Jenkins installation. It was not that tough, was it? Now that I have my Jenkins installed correctly, let me quickly walk you through some bare minimal configurations that is required. These are kind of a first time configuration that is required. So, and also let me warn you, the UI is little hard for many people to wrap their head around it, specifically the Windows guys. But if at all you're a Java guy, you know how painful it is to write UI in Java, you will kind of appreciate, all the effort that has gone into the UI. Bottom line, UI is little hard to, wrap your head around it, but once you start using it, possibly you'll start liking it. All right. So let me get into something called as Manage Jenkins. This can be viewed like a main menu for all Jenkins configuration. So I'll get into some of those important ones. Something called as Configure System. Configure System, this is where you kind of put in the configuration for your complete Jenkins instance. Few things to kind of look out for. This is a home directory. This is a Java home where all the configurations, all the workspace, anything and everything regarding Jenkins is stored out here. System message. You want to put in some message on the system. You just type in whatever you want and it's possibly show up somewhere up here on the menu. Number of executors. Very, very important configuration. This just lets Jenkins know at any point in time how many jobs or how many threads can be run. You can kind of visualize it like a thread that can be run on this particular instance. As a thumb rule, if at all you're on a single core system, number of executors 2 should be good enough. In case at any point in time, if there are multiple jobs that kind of get triggered at the same time, in case the number of executors are less compared to the number of jobs that have woken up, no need to panic, because they will all get queued up and eventually Jenkins will get to running those jobs. Just bear in mind that whenever a new job kind of gets triggered, the CPU usage and the memory usage in terms of the disk write is very high on the Jenkins instance. So that's something that you got to kind of keep in mind. All right, but number of executors, 2 for my system is kind of good. Label for my Jenkins, I don't want any of these things. Usage, how do you want to use your Jenkins? This is good for me because I only have a primary server that is running. So I want to use this node as much as possible. Quiet period. Each of these options have got some bare minimal help kind of a thing that is out here. By clicking on these question marks, you will get to know as to what are these particular configurations. All right, so this all look good. What I want to show you here is there's something regarding the Docker, timestamps, Git plugin, SVN, email notifications. I don't want that. What I want yes, I want this SMTP server configuration. Remember, I mentioned earlier that I would want Jenkins to be sending out some emails. And what I've done here is I've just configured the SMTP details of my personal email ID. In case you're in an organization, you would have some sort of an email IDs that is set up for a Jenkins server. So you can specify the SMTP server details of your company so that you can authorize Jenkins to kind of send out emails. But in case you want to try it out like me, I have configured my personal email ID, which is on my Gmail, for sending out notifications. So the SMTP server would be smtp.gmail.com. I'm using the SMTP authentication. I've provided my email ID and my password. I'm using the SMTP port, which is 465. and reply to address is the same as mine. I can just send out an email and see if at all this configuration works. Again, Gmail would not allow you to allow anybody to send out notifications on your behalf. So you'll have to lower the security level of your Gmail ID so that you can allow programmatically somebody to send out email notifications on your behalf. So I've done already that. I'm just trying to see if I can send a test email with the configurations that I've set in. Yes. All right. So the email configuration looks good. So this is how you configure your Gmail account in case you want to do that. If not, put in your organization SMTP server details, which are with a valid username and password, and it should all be set. All right, so no other configurations that I'm going to change here. All of these look good. All right, so I come back to Manage Jenkins. Okay, one other thing that I want to kind of go over is the global tool configuration. Imagine this scenario, or look at it this way. Jenkins is a continuous integration server. It doesn't know what kind of a code base it's going to pull in, what kind of a tool set that is required, or what is the code that it's going to pull in and how is it going to build. So you would have to put in all the tools that is required for building the appropriate kind of code that you're going to pull in from your source code repositories. So just to give an example, in case your source code is a Java source code, and assuming that because in this demo, this is my laptop and I've put in all the configurations, JDK, everything on my laptop because I'm a developer, I'm working on the laptop. But my continuous integration server would be a separate server without anything being installed on it. So in case I want Jenkins to run a Java code, I would need to install JDK on it. I need to specify the JDK location of this out here this way. Okay, since I already have the JDK installed and I've already put in the Java home directory, or rather the environment variable correctly, I don't need to do it. Git, if at all I want the Jenkins server to use Git, Git is a command bash or the command prompt for running Git and connecting to any other Git server. So you would need Git to be installed on that particular system and set the path accordingly. Gradle and Maven, if at all you have some Mavens as well, you want to do this. Any other tool that you're going to install on your system, which is your continuous integration server, you will have to come in here and configure something. In case you don't configure it, when Jenkins runs, it will not be able to find these tools for building your task and it'll crib about it. That's good. I don't want to save anything. Manage Jenkins. Let me see what else is required. Yes, configure global security. All right, the security is enabled, and if you see by default, it's the security access control is set to Jenkins' own user database. So what does this mean? Jenkins by default it uses file system where it stores all the usernames, which hashes up these usernames and kind of stores them. So as of now, Jenkins is configured to use its own database. Assuming that you are running in an organization, you would probably want to have some sort of an AD or an LDAP server using which you would want to control access to your Jenkins repository, rather Jenkins tool. So you would specify your LDAP server details, the root DN, password or the manager DN and the manager password and all these details in case you want to connect your Jenkins instance with your LDAP or AD or any of the authentication servers that you have in your organization. But for now, since I don't have any of these things, I'm going to use this own database. That's good enough. All right. So I will set up some authorization methods and stuff like that once I put in few jobs. So for now, let me not get into any of these details of this. Just be aware that Jenkins can be connected for authorization to an LDAP server, or you can have Jenkins managing its own servers, which is happening as of now. So I'm going to save all this stuff. That's good for me. So enough of all these configurations. Let me put in a very, very simple job. All right. So job, new item, little difficult to kind of figure out, but then that's the new item. So I'll just say, first job, this is good for me. I just give a name for my job. I would say it's a freestyle project. That's good enough for me. I don't want to choose any of that. So unless until you choose any of this particular button would not become active. So choose the freestyle project and say, okay. At a very high level, you would see general source code management, build triggers, build environment, build and post build. In case you install more and more plugins, you will see a lot more options. But for now, this is what you would see. So what am I doing? At the moment, I'm just putting up a very, very simple job. And the job could be anything and everything. So I don't want to put in a very complicated job for now. For the demo purpose, let me just put in a very, very simple job. I'll give a description. This is an optional thing. This is my first Jenkins job. All right. I don't want to choose any of these. Again, there are some helps available here. I don't want to choose any of this. I don't want to connect it into any source code for now. I don't want any triggers for now. I'll come back to this in a while. Build environment. I don't want any build environment. As a part of this build step, I just want to, run few things so that I kind of complete this particular job. So since I'm on a Windows box, I would say execute Windows batch command. All right. So what do you want to do? Let me just echo something. Echo, hello. This is my first Jenkins job, and possibly I would want the date and the timestamp pertaining to the job. I mean, the date and time in which this job was run. All right. Very, very simple command that says, this is my first job. It just puts out something along with the date and the time. All right. I don't want to do anything else. I want to keep this job as simple as this. So let me save this job. All right. So once I save this job, the job names comes up here, and then I need to build this job. And you would see some build history out here. Nothing is there as of now because I've just put in a job. I have not run it yet. All right. So let me try to build it now. You see a build number, you would see a date and a timestamp. So if I click on this, you would see a console output. If I go here, okay, as simple as that. And where is all the job details that is getting into? If you see this, if I navigate to this particular directory, all right, so this is the directory what I was mentioning earlier regarding Jenkins home. So all the job related stuff that is specific to this particular Jenkins installation is all here. All the plugins that is installed, the details of each of those plugins can be found here. All right, so the workspace is where all the jobs that I've created, whichever I'm running, there will be individual folders specific to the jobs that has been put up here. All right, so one job, one quick run, that's what it looks like. Pretty simple. Okay, let me do one thing. Let me put up a second job. I would say second job. I would say freestyle project. All right, this is my second job. I just want to demonstrate the powerfulness of the automation server and how simple it is to automate a job that is put up on Jenkins, which will be triggered automatically. Remember what I said earlier about Jenkins, because at the core of Jenkins is a very, very powerful automation server. All right, so what I'm going to do, I will just keep everything else the same. I'm going to put in a build script pretty much similar to second job that gets triggered automatically every minute. All right, let me do that. Percentage date, and I'll put in the time. All right, so I just put in another job called second job, and it pretty much does the same thing as what I was doing earlier in terms of printing the date and the time. But this time I'm just going to demonstrate the powerfulness of the automation server that is there. If you see here, there's a build trigger. So a build can be triggered using various triggers that is there. So we'll get into this GitHub triggering or hook or a webhook kind of a triggering later on. But for now, what I want to do, I want to ensure that this job that I'm going to put in would be automatically triggered on its own. Let's say every minute, I want this job to be run on its own. So build periodically is my setting. If you see here, there's a bunch of help that is available for me. So for those of you who have written cron jobs on Linux boxes, you'll find it very, very simple. But for others, don't panic. Let me just put up a very, very simple regular expression for scheduling this job every minute. All right, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, come up, come up, come up. All right, so 5 stars is all that I'm going to put in. And Jenkins got a little worried and he's asking me, do you really mean every minute? Oh yeah, I want to do this every minute. Let me save this. And how do I check whether it gets triggered every minute or not? I just don't do anything. I'll just wait for a minute. And if at all everything goes well, Jenkins would automatically trigger my second job in a minute's time from now. This time around, I'm not going to trigger anything. Look, there you see. It's automatically got triggered. If I go in here, yep, second job that gets triggered automatically. It was triggered at 16:42, which is 4:42 my time. That looks good. And if everything goes well, every 1 minute onwards, this job would be automatically triggered. Now that I have my Jenkins up and running, a few jobs that has been put up here on my Jenkins instance, I would need a way of controlling access to my Jenkins server. This is wherein I would use a plugin called role-based access plugin and create few rules. The rules are something like a global role and a project role, project specific role. I can have different roles and I can have users who have signed up or the users whom I create kind of assigned to these roles so that each of these users fall into some category. This is my way of kind of controlling access to my Jenkins instance and ensuring that people don't do something unwarranted. All right, so first things first, let me go ahead and install a plugin for doing that. So I get into Manage Jenkins and Manage Plugin. A little bit of a confusing screen in my opinion. There is updates available, installed and advanced. As of now, we don't have the role-based plugin. So let me go to available. It'll take some time for it to get refreshed. All right, now these are the available plugins. These are the installed plugins. All right, so let me come back to available and I would want to search for my role-based access plugin. So I would just search for role and hit enter. Okay, role-based authorization strategy enables user authorization using a role-based strategy. Roles can be defined globally or for particular jobs or nodes and stuff like that. So exactly, this is the plugin that I want. I would want to install it without a restart. All right, looks good so far. Yes. Go back to the top of the page. Yes. Remember, Jenkins is running on a Java using a Java instance. So typically many things would work the same way unless and until you want to restart Jenkins once in a while. But as a good practice, whenever you do some sort of a big installations or big patches on your Jenkins instance, just ensure that you kind of restart it. Otherwise, there would be a difference in terms of what is installed on the system and what is there on the file system. You would need to flush out few of those settings later on. But for now, these are all very small plugins, so these would run without any problems. But otherwise, if at all there are some plugins which would need a restart, kindly go ahead and restart your Jenkins instance. But for now, I don't need that. It looks good. I've installed the plugin. So where do I see my plugin? I installed the plugin that is specific to the user control or the access control. So let me go into, yes, global security. And I would see this role-based strategy showing up now. All right, so this comes in because of my installation of my role-based plugin. So this is what I would want to enable because I already have my own database set up. And for the authorization part, in the sense that who can do what, I'm going to install. I've already installed a role-based strategy plugin and I'm going to enable that strategy. All right, I would say save. Okay, now I've installed the role-based access plugin. I would need to just set it up and check that, I would go ahead and create some roles and ensure that I assign users as per these roles. All right, so let me go to Manage Jenkins, configure. All right, let me see, where is this? Configure global security. Is that where I create my roles? Nope, not here. Yes, manage and assign roles. Okay. Again, you would see these options only after you install these plugins. So for now, I've just enabled the plugin. I've enabled role-based access control, and I would go ahead and create some roles for this particular Jenkins instance. So I would say first, manage roles. So I would need to create some roles here, and the roles are at a very high level. These are global roles, and there are some project roles, and there are some slave roles. I'll not get into details of all of these. At a very, very high level, which is a global role, let me just create a role. A role can be kind of visualized like a group. So I would create a role called developer. Typically, the Jenkins instance or the CA instance are kind of owned up or controlled by QA guys. So QA guys would need to provide some sort of limited access to developers. So that's why I'm creating a role called developer, and I'm adding this role at a global role level. So I would say add this here, and you would see this developer role that is there. And each of these options, if you hover over it, you would see some sort of a help on what are these permissions specific to. So what I want is it sounds a little different, but I would want to give very little permissions for the developer. So from an administration perspective, I would just want him to have a read kind of a role. Credentials, again, I would just want a view kind of a role. I don't want him to create any agents and all that stuff. That looks good for me. For a job, I would want him to just possibly read. I don't want him to build. I don't want him to cancel any jobs. I don't want him to configure any job. I don't even want him to create any job. I would just want him to read few things. I would not give him possibly a role to the workspace as well. I mean, I don't want him to have access to the workspace. I would just want him to read a job or check, have read-only access to the job. Run. No, I don't want him to give him any particular access which will allow him to run any jobs. View, configure, yeah, possibly create, yeah, delete. I don't want read, yes, definitely. And this is the specific role. So what I'm doing, I'm just creating a global role called developer, and I'm giving him very limited roles, in the sense that I don't want this developer to be able to run any agents, nor create jobs, or build jobs, or cancel jobs, or configure jobs. At the max, I would just want him to read a job that is already put up there. Okay, so I would save. Now I've created a role. I still don't have any users that is there on the system. So let me go ahead and create some user on the system. That's not here. I would say configure, manage Jenkins, manage users. Okay, let me create a new user. I would call this user as, yeah, developer one sounds good. Some password that I can remember. Okay, his name is developer one, d@d.com or something like that. Okay, so this is the admin with which I kind of configured or brought up the system, and developer one is a user that I have configured. So still have not set any roles for this particular user yet. So I would go to manage Jenkins. I would say manage and assign roles. I would say assign roles. Okay, so if you see, what I'm going to do now is assign a role that is specific to that particular developer. I will find the particular user and assign him the developer role that I've already configured. The role shows up here. I would need to find my user who I've created and then assign him to that particular role. So if you remember, the user that I created was developer one. I would add this particular user, and now this particular user, what kind of a role I want him to have, because this is the global role that I had created. So developer, I would assign this developer one to this particular global role, and I would go ahead and save my changes. Now let me check the permissions of this particular user by logging out of my admin account and logging back as developer one. If you remember, this role was created with very less privileges. So there you go. I have Jenkins, but I don't see a new item. I can't trigger a new job. I can't do anything. I see these jobs. However, I don't think so I'll be able to start this job. I don't have the permission set for that. The maximum I can do is look at the job, see what was there as a part of the console output and stuff like that. So this is a limited role that was created, and I added this developer to that particular role, which was a developer role, so that the developers don't get to configure any of the jobs, because the Jenkins instance is owned by a QA person. He doesn't want to give developer any administrative rights. So the rights that he set out by creating a developer role, and anybody who is tagged, any user who is tagged as a part of this developer role would get the same kind of permissions. And these permissions can be, fine grained. It can be a project specific permissions as well. But for now, I just demonstrated the high level permission that I had set in. Let me quickly log out of this user and get back as the admin user, because I need to continue with my demo with the developer role that was created, I have very, very less privileges. One of the reasons for Jenkins being so popular, as I mentioned earlier, is the bunch of plugins that is provided by users or community users who don't charge any money for these plugins, but it's got plugins for connecting anything and everything. So if you can navigate to, or if you can find Jenkins plugins, you would see index of over so many plugins that is there. All of these are wonderful plugins. Whatever connectors that you would need, if you want to connect Jenkins to an AWS instance, or you want to connect Jenkins to a Docker instance, or any of those containers, you would have a plugin. You can go and search up. If I want to connect Jenkins to Bitbucket, Bitbucket is one of the Git servers. There's so many plugins that is available. Okay, so bottom line, Jenkins without plugins is nothing. So plugins is the heart of Jenkins. For you to connect, or for in order to connect Jenkins with any of the containers or any of the other tool sets, you would need the plugins. If you want to connect, or you want to build a repository which has got Java and Maven, you would need to install Maven and JDK on your Jenkins instance. If at all you're looking for a .NET build or a Microsoft build, you would need to have MS Build installed on your Jenkins instance, and the plugins that will trigger MS Build. If at all you want to listen to some server-side webhooks from GitHub, you would need GitHub specific plugins. If you want to connect Jenkins to AWS, you need those plugins. If you want to connect to a Docker instance that is running anywhere in the world, as long as you have the URL which is publicly reachable, you just have a Docker plugin that is installed on your Jenkins instance. SonarQube is one of the popular static code analyzers. So you can connect a Jenkins build, you can build a job on Jenkins and push it to SonarQube and get SonarQube to run analysis on that and get back the results in Jenkins. All of these works very well because of the plugins. Now with that, let me connect our Jenkins instance to GitHub. I already have a very, very simple Java repository up on my GitHub instance. So let me connect Jenkins to this particular GitHub instance and pull out a job that is put up there. All right. So this is my very, very simple, repository that is there called Hello Java. And this is what is there in the repository. There is a hello.java application that is here, or a simple class file that is there. It's got just one line of system.out. So this is already present on github.com at this place, and this would be the URL for this repository. If I pick up the HTTPS URL, this is my HTTPS URL. So what I would do is I would connect my Jenkins instance to go to GitHub, provide my credentials, and pull out this repository which is on the cloud hosted github.com and get it to my Jenkins instance, and then build this particular Java file. I'm keeping the source code very, very simple. It's just a Java file. How do I build my Java file? How do I compile my Java file? I just say Java C and the name of my class file, which is hello.java. And how do I run my Java file? I would say Java and hello. Okay, so remember, I don't need to install any plugins now because what it needs is a Git plugin. So if you remember, when we were doing the installation, there was a bunch of recommended plugins. So Git is already installed on my system, so I don't need to install it again. So let me put up a new job here. It says Git job. Let it be a freestyle project. That's good for me. I would say okay. All right, so the source code management. Remember, in the earlier examples, we did not use any source code because we were just putting up some echo kind of jobs. We did not need any integration with any of the source code systems. So now let me connect this. So I'm going to put up a source code, and Git would show up because the plugin is already there. SVN, Perforce, any of those additional source code management tools, if at all you would need, just install those plugins, and Jenkins connects wonderfully well to all these particular source control tools. Okay, so I would copy the HTTPS URL from here. I would say this is the URL that I'm supposed to go and grab my source code from. But all right, that sounds good. But what is the username and password? So I'll have to specify a username and password. All right, so I would say the username, this is my username, and this is my HTTPS credential for my job. Okay, so this is my username and this is my password. I just save this. I say add, and then I would say, use these credentials to go to GitHub and then on my behalf, pull out a repository. All right. If at all at this stage, if there's any error in terms of Jenkins not able to find Git or the git.exe, or if my credentials are wrong, somewhere down here, you would see a red message saying that, something is not right. You can just go ahead and kind of fix that. For now, this looks good for me. I'm going to grab this URL, what am I going to do? This step would pull the source code from the GitHub, and then what would be there as a part of my build step? Because this repository just has a Java file, correct? Hello.java. So in order for me to build this, I would just say execute Windows batch command, and I would say Java C hello.java. That is the way I would build my Java code. And if I have to run it, I would just say Java hello. Pretty simple, 2 steps. And this would run after the repository contents are fetched from GitHub. So Java C, Java, that sounds good. I would say save this and let me try to run this. Okay, if you see, there's a lot of, it executes Git on your behalf. It goes out here, it provides my credentials and says, it pulls all my repository, and by default, it will pull up the master branch that is there on my repository. And it kind of builds this whole thing, Java C hello.java, and it runs this project Java hello. And there you see, this is the output that is there. And if at all you want to look at the contents of the repository, if you can go here, this is my workspace of my system. Hang on, this is not right. Okay, git job. If you see here, this is my hello.java. This is the same program that was there on my GitHub repository. Okay, so this is a program that was there on my GitHub repository. All right, so this was the same program that was here, and Jenkins on our behalf went over all the way to GitHub, pulled this repository from there, and then it brought it down to my local system on my Jenkins instance. It compiled it and it ran this particular application. Okay, now that I've integrated Jenkins successfully with GitHub for a simple Java application, let me build a little bit on top of it. What I will do is I have a Maven based web application that is up there as a repository in my GitHub. So this is the repository that I'm talking about. It's called MVN web app. It's a Maven based repository. As you would know, Maven is a very simple Java based build tool that will allow you to run various targets, and it'll compile. It will, based upon the goals that you specify, it can compile, it can run some tests, and it can build a war file and even deploy it into some other server. For now, what we're going to use Maven is just for building and creating a package out of this particular web application. It contains a bunch of things, and what is important is just the index.jsp. It just contains an HTML file that is there as a part of this web application. So from a perspective of requirements, now since I'm going to connect Jenkins with this particular repository, Git, we already have that set. We only need 2 other things. One is Maven, because Jenkins will use Maven. So in order to use Maven, Jenkins would have to have a Maven installation that is there on the Jenkins box. And in this case, the Jenkins box is this laptop. And after I have my Maven installed, I also need a Tomcat server. Tomcat is a very simple web server that you can freely download. I'll let you know how to quickly download and install the Tomcat. All right, so download Maven first. There are various ways in which you can kind of download this Maven. There is zip files, binary zip files, and archive files. So what I've done is I've just already downloaded Maven, and if you see, I've unzipped it here. So this is the folder with which I've unzipped my Maven. So as you know, Maven again is a one open source build tool. So you'll have to set in a few configurations and set up the path. So mvn hyphen version, if I specify this, after I set in my path, Maven should work. And if at all I echo m2 home, which is nothing but the variable environment variable specific to Maven home, it is already set here. So once you unzip Maven, just set this m2 home variable to the directory where you unzipped your Maven. Also, just set the path to this particular directory /bin, because that is where your Maven executables are all found. All right, so that's with Maven. And since I've set the path and the environment variable Maven is running perfectly fine on my system, I've just verified it. Okay, next one is the Tomcat server. Download Apache Tomcat server 8.5 is what I have on my system. So I'm just going to show you where to download this from. This is where you download Tomcat server, and I already have the server downloaded. Again, this doesn't need any installation. I just unzip it here and it kind of has a bin and configuration. I've made some subtle changes in the configuration. First and foremost, Tomcat server also by default runs on port 8080. Since we already have our Jenkins server running on port 8080, we cannot let Tomcat run on the same port. There will be a port clash. So what I've done, I've configured Tomcat to use a different port. So if I go to this configuration file here, there is a server.xml. Let me open this up here. All right. Okay. So this is the port. By default, it will be 8080. I've just modified it to 8081. So I've changed the port on which my Tomcat server would run. All right. So that's one change. Second change, when Jenkins kind of tries to get into my Tomcat and deploy something for someone, he would need some authentications so that he'll be allowed deployment by Tomcat. So for that, I need to create a user on Tomcat and provide this user credentials to my Jenkins instance. So I would go to Tomcat users.xml file here. I've already created a username called deployer and the password is deployer, and I've added a role called manager-script. Manager-script will allow programmatic access to the Tomcat server. So this is the role that is there. So using this credentials, I will enable or I'll empower Jenkins to get into my Tomcat server and deploy my application. All right, only these two things that is required. Let me just start my Tomcat server first. So I get into my bin folder, I open a command prompt here, and there's a startup.bat. It's pretty fast. It just takes a few seconds. Yes, there you go. Tomcat server is up and running. Now this is running on port 8081. So let me just check if that looks good. So localhost 8081. Okay, my Tomcat server is up and running. That sounds good. The user is already configured on this. That's also fine. So what I'll do as a part of my first job, Maven is also installed on my system. So I'm good to use Maven as a part of my Jenkins. So I will put up a simple job now. I will say job, MVN, web app. I'll call this freestyle job. That's good. Okay, so this will be a Git repository. What is the URL of my Git repository? Is this guy, HTTPS URL. Okay, that's this URL. I will use the credentials. The old credentials that I set up will work well because it's the same Git user that I'm kind of connecting into. All right. So now the change happens here where after I get this, since I said this is a simple Maven repository, I will have some Maven targets to run. So the simple target first is let me run Maven package. This creates a war file. Okay, so MVN package is the target. Package is the target. So whenever I run this package, it kind of creates it, it builds it, it tests it, and then creates a package. So this is all that is required. Maybe let me try to save this and let me first run this and see if it connects well, if there's any problem with my war file or the war file gets created properly. Okay, wonderful. So it built a war file, and if you see, it all shows you what is the location where this war file was generated. So this will be the workspace. If you see this war file was successfully built. Now I need to grab this particular war file and then I would need to deploy it into Tomcat server. Again, I would need a small plugin to do this because I need to connect Tomcat with my Jenkins server. Let me go ahead and install the plugin for the container deployment. So I will go to manage plugins, available, type in container, container, deploy to container. Okay, so this would is the plugin that I would need. I would install it without a restart. Right, seems to be very fast. Nope, sorry, it's still installing. Okay, it installed the plugin. So if at all you see this, if you go to my workspace, Okay, in the target folder, I would see this web application war file that is already built. So I would need to configure this plugin to pull up this war file and deploy it onto the Tomcat server. For deploying onto the Tomcat server, I will use the credentials of the user that I've created. Okay, so let me go to configure this particular project again. And okay, all this is good. So the package is good. I'm going to just create a package. That's all fine. Now add a post build step. So after the war file is built as a part of this package directive, let me use this deployment to container. Now this will show up after you install the plugin. So deploy this one to the container. Now what is that you're supposed to specify? You're supposed to specify what is the location. Okay, so this is a global configuration that is there that will allow you to, from the root folder, it will pick up the war file that is there. So ******war, that's good for me. Okay, what is the context path? Context path is nothing but just the name of an application that, under which it will get deployed into the Tomcat server. I will just say MVN web app. That's the name of my thing. Now I need to specify what kind of a container that I'm talking about. All right, so the deployment would be for this Tomcat 8.5 is what I need. Okay, because the server that we have is a Tomcat 8.5 server that I have. So this would be the URL. So the credentials, yes, I need to add a credential for this particular server. So if you remember, I had created a credential for my web application. So let me just find that. My Tomcat server, yes, configuration of this. Okay, so deployer and deployer. Username is deployer, password is deployer. Okay, so let me use that credential. I would say add a new credential, Jenkins credential. The username is deployer and the password is deployer. So I would use this deployer credentials for that. And what is the URL of my Tomcat instance? So this is the URL of my Tomcat instance. So take the war file that is found in this particular folder. And then, context path is mn web app, use the deployer deployment credentials and get into this localhost, which is there 8081. This is the Tomcat server that is running on my system, and then go ahead and deploy it. Okay, so that is all that is required. So I would say just save this and let me run it now. Okay, it successfully built the war file. It is trying to deploy it, and looks like the deployment went ahead perfectly well. So the context path was MVN web app. So if I type in this, right, if at all I go ahead into my Tomcat server, there would be a web apps folder. You would see the date timestamp. So this is the file that got recently copied, and this is the Explorer version of our application. So the application was built, the source code of this application was pulled from the GitHub server. It was built locally on the Jenkins instance, and then it was pushed into a Tomcat server which is running on a different port, which is 80881. Now for this demo, I'm running everything locally on my system, but assuming that this particular Tomcat instance was running on some other server with some other different IP address, all that you got to go and change is the URL of the server. So this would be the server in case you already have that, if you have a Tomcat server which is running on some other machine, that's all fine. With a different IP, that's all good enough. The whole bundle or the war file that was built as a part of this Jenkins job gets transferred onto the other server and gets deployed. That's the beauty of Jenkins and automatic deployments, or rather deployments using Jenkins and Maven. Distributed build or master slave configuration in Jenkins. As you would have seen, we just have one instance of Jenkins server up and running all the time. And also I told you that whenever any job that kind of, gets started on the Jenkins server, it is little heavy on in terms of disk space and the CPU utilization. So which kind of, if at all you're in an organization wherein you're heavily reliant on the Jenkins server, you don't want your Jenkins server to go down. So that's wherein you kind of start distributing the load that is there on the Jenkins server. So you primarily have a server, which is just a placeholder or like a master, who will take in all the kind of jobs. And what he'll do is based upon trigger that has happened to the job or whichever job needs to be built, if at all, he can delegate these jobs onto some other machines or some other slaves. That's a wonderful thing to have. Okay, use case one. Use case two, assuming that, if you have a Jenkins server that is running on a Windows box or on a Linux one, and if at all you have a need where you need to build based upon operating systems, you have multiple build configurations to support. Maybe you need to build a Windows, Windows based .NET kind of a projects where you would need a Windows machine to build this particular project. You also have a requirement where you want to build Linux based systems. You also have a Mac, you support some sort of an apps or something that is built on Mac OS. You would need to build, Mac based system as well. So how are you going to support all these needs? So that's wherein a beautiful concept of master slave or primary and delegations or agent and master comes into play. So typically you would have one Jenkins server who will just configure with all the proper authorizations, users, configurations, and everything is set up on this Jenkins server. His job is just delegations. He will listen to some sort of triggers, or based upon the job that is coming in, he will, if there is a nice way of delegating these jobs to somebody else and taking back the results, he can control a lot of other systems. And these systems may not have a complete, or there's no need to put in a complete Jenkins installation. All that you got to do is have a very, very simple runner or a slave that is a simple jar file that is run as a low priority thread or a process within these systems. So with that, you can have a wonderful distributed build server that can be set up. And in case one of the servers goes down, your master would know that what went down and kind of delegate the task to somebody else. So this is the kind of distributed build or the master slave configuration. So what I'll do in this exercise or in this demo is I will set up a simple slave. But since I don't have too many machines to kind of play around, what I'll do is I will set up a slave in one other folder within my hard drive. So I've got the C drive and D drive. My Jenkins is on my C drive. So what I would do is I would just use my E drive and set up a very, very simple slave out there. I'll just show you how to provision a slave and how to connect to a slave and how to delegate a job to that slave. Let me go back to my Jenkins master and configure him to talk to an agent. So there are various ways in which this client and server talk to each other. What I'm going to choose is something called as JNLP, Java Network Launch Protocol. So using this, I would ensure that the client and server talk to each other. So for that, I need to ensure that I kind of enable this JNLP port. So let me try to find out where is that. Let me try this. Okay, yes. Agents, and by default this JNLP agents thing would be disabled. So if you see here, there's a small help on this. So I'm going to use this JNLP, which is nothing but Java Network Launch Protocol, and I'll configure the master and server to talk to each other using JNLP. So for that, I need to enable this guy. So I enable this guy instead of making by default the configuration was disabled. So I make him random. I make him enabled, and I say save this configuration. Alright, so now I configured or I made a setting for the master so that the JNLP port is kind of opened up. So let me go ahead and create an agent. So I'll go to manage nodes. So if you see here, there's only one master here. So let me provision a new node here. So this is the way in which you bring up a new node. You have to configure it on the server. Jenkins would put in some sort of security around this particular agent and let you know how to launch this particular agent so that he can connect to your Jenkins master. So I would say new node. I would give a name for my node. I would say Windows node because both of these are Windows only. So that's fine. I just give an identifier saying that Windows node. I would say this is a permanent agent. I would say okay. So if you see the name, let me just copy this name here with the description. Number of executors, since it's a slave node and both of these are running on my system, I will keep the number of executors as 1. That's fine. Remote root directory. Now this is where, let me just clarify this, since I have both my master is running on my C drive program files 86, or hang on, not 86, C:program files. It is indeed 86. All right, Jenkins. So this is where my master is running. So I don't want the C drive. What I'll do is I'll use something called as A drive. I have another drive in my system, but please visualize this like, you're running this on a separate system altogether. So I create a folder here called Jenkins node, and this is where I'm going to place I'm going to provision my slave. and I'm going to run him from here. So this is the directory in which I'm going to provision my slave node. So I'm going to copy this here, and that is the remote root directory of your particular agent or slave. So I just copy it here. The label, probably this is fine for me. And usage, how do you want to use this guy? So don't want him to run all kinds of jobs. I will only build jobs with label expressions that match this particular node. And so this is the label of this node. So in order for somebody to kind of delegate any task to them, they will have to specify this particular label. So imagine this way, if I have a bunch of Windows mesh system, I name it as Windows star. Anything that starts from Windows, I can give a regular expression and say that anything that matches Windows, run this particular task there. If I have some Mac machines, I name all these Mac agents as Mac star or something like that, and I can delegate all tasks, saying that start with whatever starts with Mac in this node, run the Mac jobs there. So you identify a node using the label and then delegate the task there. All right. So launch method, we will use Java Web Start because we're going to use JNLP protocol. Okay, that sounds good. Directory, I think nothing else is required. Availability, yes, we'll keep this agent, yep, online as much as possible. That sounds good. All right, let me save this. All right, I'm just provisioning this particular node now. So if I click on this node, I get a bunch of commands along with an agent.jar. So this is the agent.jar that has to be taken down to the other machine or the slave node, and from there I need to run this along with a small security credential. So let me copy this whole text here in my notepad. Notepad plus plus is good for me. Okay, I copy this whole path there. I also want to download this agent.jar. I would say yes. This agent.jar is the one that is configured by our server. So all the details that is required for launching this agent.jar is found in this. For launching this agent is found in this agent.jar. So typically I need to take this jar file onto the other system and then kind of run it from there. So I have this agent.jar. I copy this, or rather I cut this. I come back to my folder, my Jenkins node. I paste it here. Okay, so now with this provision agent.jar, and I need to use this whole command, Control A, Control C, and then launch this particular agent. So let me bring up a command prompt right here and then launch it. So I'm saying in the same folder where there is agent.jar, I'm going to launch this particular agent, java-jar, agent.jar, JNLP. This is the URL of my server. In case the server and client are on different locations or different IPs, you have to specify the IP address. All this anyway would show up. And then the secret and, the root folder of your Jenkins or the slave node. Okay. So something ran and then, it says it's connected very well. It seems to have connected very well. So let me come back to my Jenkins instance and see, if at all you see earlier, this was not connected. Now let me refresh this guy. Okay, now these two guys are connected. Provision a Jenkins node, and then I copied all the credentials or the slave.jar along with the launch code, and then took it to the other system and kind of ran it from there. Since I don't have another system, I've just got a separate directory in another folder, another drive, and I'm launching the agent from here. As long as this particular agent is up and running, or this command prompt is up and running, the agent would be connected. So once I close this, the connection goes down. All right, so successfully we've launched this particular agent. Now, this would be the home directory of this Jenkins node or the Jenkins slave. So any task that I'm going to delegate to this particular slave would all be run here. It will create a workspace right here. All right, so good. So let me just come back and let me kind of put up a new task here. I will say that, delegate job is good. I say freestyle project. I'm going to create a very, very simple job here. I don't want it to connect to Git or anything like that. Let me just create a very, very simple echo delegated to the slave, delegated to, I don't like the word slave, delegated to agent. Put this way. All right. So delegated to agent sounds good. Now, how am I going to ensure that this particular job runs on the agent or on the slave that I've configured? Right? Do you see this? If at all you remember how we provisioned our particular slave, we gave a label, right? So now I'm going to put in a job that will only match this particular label. So I'm going to say that whatever matches this, Windows label, run this job on that particular node. So we have only one node that's matching this, Windows node. So this job will be delegated out there. So I save this and let me build this. This is again a very, very simple job. There's nothing in this. I just want to demonstrate how to kind of delegate it to an agent. So if you see this, it ran successfully. And where is the workspace? The workspace is right inside our Jenkins node. It created a new workspace, delegated job, it put in here. So my old or my primary master job is in SQL program files under Jenkins, and this is the slave job that was successfully run. Very, very simple, but very, very powerful concept of master slave configuration or distributed build in Jenkins. Okay, approaching the final section where we've done all this hard work in bringing up our Jenkins server, configuring it, putting up some jobs on it, creating users and all this stuff. Now, we don't want this configuration to kind of go away. We want a very nice way of ensuring that we back up all this configuration. And in case there is any failure, hardware crash or a machine crash, we will want to kind of restore from the existing configuration that we kind of backed up. So one quick way to do that would be, or one dirty way to do that would be just, take a complete backup of our C program files Jenkins directory, because that's where our whole Jenkins configuration is present. But we don't want to do that. Let's use some plugins for taking up a backup. So let me go to Manage Jenkins and click on Available. And let me search for some back. There are a bunch of backup plugins. So I would recommend one of these plugins that I specifically use. So this is the backup plugin. So let me go ahead and install this plugin. All right, so we went ahead and installed this plugin. So let me come back to my manage plugins. So this plugin is there. So hang on, backup manager. So you will see this option once you install this plugin. So first time I can do a setup. I would say backup this particular. I'll give a folder. This folder is pertaining to the folder where I want Jenkins to back up some data. And I would say the format should be zip format is good enough. Let me give a name or a template or a file name for my backup. This is good. I want it in verbose mode. I don't want to shut on my Jenkins, or should I shut it down? No. Okay. One thing that you got to remember is that whenever a backup happens, if there are too many jobs that is running on the server, it can kind of slow down your Jenkins instance, because it's in the process of copying few of those things, and if the files are being changed at that moment, it's a little bit problematic for Jenkins. So typically you back up your servers only when there is very less load, or typically try to bring it to a shutdown kind of a state and then take a backup. All right, so I'm going to back up all these things. I don't want to exclude anything else. I want the history. I want the Maven artifacts. Possibly I don't want this guy. I would just say save, and then I would say back him up. So this would run a bunch of steps, and all the files that is required as a part of this is pretty fast. But then if at all you have too many things up on your server, for now we didn't have too many things up on our server, but in case you had too many things to kind of back up, this may take a while. So let me just pause this recording and get back to you once the backup is complete. So there you go. The backup was successful. Created a backup of all our workspace, the configurations, the users, and all that. So all this is kind of hidden down in this particular zip file. So at any instance, if at all I kind of crash my system for some instance, or say hard disk failure, and I bring up a new instance of Jenkins, I can kind of use the backup plugin for restoring this particular configurations. So how do I do that? I just come back to my manage Jenkins, come back to backup manager, and I would say restore Hudson or Jenkins configuration.
Now, the first one is that what exactly is in DevOps here? Now, DevOps is basically a combination of two practices, like that is the development and operations. So development is having their own task of doing the development and preparing the source code, and operation is responsible for deploying the source code to a specific environment, whether it's a production or any other environment. So they take care of all those tasks, creating the virtual machines, managing, performing the patching, and number of tasks is there from the operations perspective. Now, development is something which keeps on working on the source code there on the development, and they are responsible for keeping a particular product up and running. So they do the performance, they do the coding, they do the particular interaction with the testing to validate their source code. A huge number of activities is actually done by the development team, and they eventually uses a n number of tools like scripting tools, coding tools, development tools. A lot of tools they basically use to support their development, because they are performing different kind of programming. It could be a possibility that more than one programming language is being used for your project. So that's kind of wider scope is present as such over here when we talk about the DevOps here. Now, from the operations perspective, it's basically a team which is responsible for managing the workforce, right? And it's something which we can use to see that all the daily activities and operations should be managed effectively and efficient. So that's the main important point over here, that whenever we are working with the operations, whenever we are working on that, we should be able to get a kind of a decent amount of work and decent amount of activities managed with the help of operations teams here. So operation teams is pretty much responsible for keeping the environment up and running, and whatever the activities and maintenance work we want to do, we will be able to do on that. Now, DevOps really helps us to achieve a lot of milestones over here. Now let's talk about that one by one. So very first one of that is that it helps us to get a frequent release of deliveries here. Now, we were doing the releases prior to DevOps also, but that was not that much frequent. Probably people were doing like every quarter, every 3 months, 4 months. That kind of time duration was being used by the team to deliver the source code or deliver into a specific environment. But the moment the specific DevOps comes into the picture, the frequency of this release really increased a lot. So some organization, in fact, trying to do like every month release, twice a month. So that's the kind of frequency which we are getting when we move on to the DevOps. So that really helped and got efficient with the introduction of DevOps here. Now, second one is the team collaboration. Now that is also improved drastically, because earlier the operations and the development teams were not working in that collaboration. They were like working involved in their own task, but with the help of DevOps, they really come along and had a very good team collaborations, which really helps them to increase the overall productivity and the performance of the product. So these are the prime milestones which we achieve with the implementation of DevOps as such into our project. Another one is that it helps to get a kind of a better management here. So effective and efficient management is what we get with the help of DevOps, because ultimately you have redefined your processes, you have implemented certain development tools, certain automations, and that really helps you to increase the overall management of all your unplanned work. So the planning is something which got really improved with the help of DevOps. And faster resolution of issues, because the way you are delivering your source code to the production environment, you are pretty much doing it into a less duration of time. And when that is happening, definitely there is a kind of a increase in the number of bugs which is getting resolved. And there is another benefit that ultimately the number of bugs which you are getting in production, that drastically reduced in case of DevOps. So since we are getting less number of issues and bugs, it's very easy for us to do the resolutions quite quickly and implement into a specific production environment. Right? So DevOps today is being implemented by most of the major organizations, whether it's a financial organization, whether it's a kind of a service organization. Every organization is somehow looking forward for the implementation and the adaptation of DevOps, because it totally redefines and automate the whole development process altogether, and whatever the manual efforts you were putting earlier, that is simply or gets automated with the help of these tools here. So this is something which get really implemented, because of some of the important feature like a CI/CD pipeline, because CI/CD pipeline is responsible for delivering your source code into the production environment in less duration of time. So CI/CD pipeline is ultimately the goal, which really helps us to deliver more into the production environment when we talk about from this perspective. Now let's talk about that. What exactly is a CI/CD pipeline? Now, when we go into that part, when we go into that understanding, so CI/CD pipeline is basically continuous integration and continuous delivery concept, which is used or which is considered as a backbone of the overall DevOps approach. Now, it's one of the prime approach which we implement when we are going for a DevOps implementation for our project. So if I have to go for a DevOps implementation, the very first and the minimum implementation and the automation which I'm looking forward is actually from the particular CI/CD pipelines here. So CI/CD pipelines is really a wonderful option when we talk about the DevOps here. So what exactly is the pipeline term all about? So pipeline is a series of events that are connected together with each other. It's kind of a sequence of the various steps, like typically when we talk about any kind of deployment, so we have like build process, like we compile the source code, we generate the artifacts, we do the testing, and then we deploy to a specific environment. All these various steps which we used to do it like manually, that is something which we can do it into a pipeline. So pipeline is nothing but a sequence of all these steps interconnected with each other, executed one by one into a particular sequence. Now, the pipelines is responsible for performing a variety of tasks like building up the source code, running the test cases. Probably the deployment can also be added up when we go for the continuous integration and continuous delivery there. So all these steps are being done into a sequence, definitely, because sequence is very important when we talk about the pipeline. So you need to talk about the sequence the same way in which you're working on the development, and in a typical world, the same thing you will be putting up into a specific pipeline. So that's a very important aspect to be considered. Now let's talk about what is the continuous integration here. Now continuous integration is also known as the CI. Pretty much you can see that a lot of tools are actually named as CI, but they are referring to the continuous integration only. So continuous integration is a practice that integrates the source code into a shared repository, and it used to automate the verification of the source code. So it involves the build automations, test cases automation. So it also helps us to detect the issues and the bugs quite easily and quite faster. That's a very early mechanism which we can do as such if we want to resolve all these problems. Now continuous integrations does not eliminate the bugs, but yes, it definitely helps them easily to find out, because we are talking about the automated process, we are talking about the automated test cases. So definitely that is something which can help us to find out the bugs, and then the development can help on that, and they can proceed with those bugs, and they can try to resolve those things one by one. So it's not a kind of automated process which will eventually remove the bugs. Bugs is something which you have to recode and you have to fix it by following the development practice, but yes, it can really help us to find those bugs quite easy and help them to remove. Now, what is the continuous delivery here? So continuous delivery, also known as CD, is in kind of a phase in which the changes are made into the code before the deployment. Now, in this case, what happens that it's something which we are discussing, or we are validating that what exactly we want to deliver it to the customer. So what exactly we are going ahead, or we are moving to the customer. So that's what we typically do in case of continuous delivery. And the ultimate goal of the pipeline is to make the deployments. That's the end result, because coding is not the only thing. You code the programs, you do the development. After that, it's all about the deployments, like how you're going to perform the deployment. So that is a very important aspect. You want to go ahead with the deployments, that's it, you can go there. And that's a real beauty about this, because it's in kind of a way in which we can identify that how the deployments can be done or can be executed as such here. Right. So the ultimate goal for the pipeline is nothing but to do the deployments and to proceed further on that. Right. So when both these practices are placed in together in an order, so all the steps could be referred as a complete automated process, and this process is known as CI/CD. So when we are talking about, like, when we are working on this automation, so in that case, what happens that we are looking forward that how the automation needs to be done. And since it's in kind of a CI/CD automation which we are talking about, so it's nothing but the end result would be like build and deployment automation. So you will be taking care of both the build and the test case executions and the deployments as such when we talk about as such the CI/CD here. The implementation of CI/CD also enables the team to do the build and deploys quite quickly and efficiently, because these are things which is happening automatically, so there is no manual efforts involved and there is no scope of human error also. So we have frequently seen that while doing the deployments we may miss some binaries or some miss can be there, so that is something which is completely removed as such when we talk about this. The process makes the teams more agile, productive, and the confident here, because the automations definitely gives a kind of a boost to the confidence that yes, things are going to work perfectly fine and there is no issues as such present. Now, why exactly Jenkins? Like Jenkins is what we typically understand, or we here and there, that it's a CI tool, it's a CD tool. So what exactly is Jenkins all about? So Jenkins is also known as a kind of orchestration tool. It's an automated tool which is there, and the best part is that it's completely open source. Yes, there are some particular paid or the enterprise tools are there like CloudBees and all, but there is no as such offering difference between the CloudBees and the Jenkins here. So Jenkins is a kind of open source tool which a lot of organizations pretty much implement as it is itself. So even if they don't want to go, we have seen in a lot of big organizations where they are not going for the enterprise tool like CloudBees and all, and they are going for the pretty much core Jenkins software as such here. So this tool makes it easy for the developers to integrate the changes to the project. That is something which is very important, because it can really help the teams to say that how the things can be done and how it can be performed over there. So the tools is very easy for the developers to integrate, and that's the biggest benefit which we are getting when we talk about these tools as such. So Jenkins is a very important tool to be considered when we talk about all these automations. Now, Jenkins achieves continuous integration with the help of plugins. That is also a kind of another feature or benefit which we get, because there are so many plugins which is available there as such, which is being used. And for example, you want to have an integration with Kubernetes, Docker and all. Maybe by default those plugins are not installed, but yes, you have the provisioning that you can go for the installation of those plugins, and yes, those features will start embedded up and integrated within your Jenkins. So this is the reason, this is the main benefit which we get when we talk about the Jenkins implementation. So Jenkins is one of the best fit which is there for building a CI/CD pipeline, because of its flexibility, open source nature, plugin capabilities, the support for plugins, and it's quite easy to use, and it's very simple, straightforward GUI which is there, which can definitely helps us. You can easily understand and go through the Jenkins, and you can grab the understanding, and as an end result you will be able to have a very robust tool which using which pretty much any kind of source code or any kind of programming language you can implement CI/CD. Whether it's an Android, it's a .NET, it's a Java, it's a Node.js, all the languages are having the support for the Jenkins. So let's talk about the CI/CD pipeline with the Jenkins here. Now, to automate the entire development process, a CI/CD pipeline is the ultimate solution which we are looking forward. To build such a pipeline, Jenkins is our best solution and best fit which is available here. So there are pretty much 6 steps which is involved when we look forward for any kind of pipeline. It's a generic pipeline which we are looking forward. Now it may have like another steps which is available there, probably some additional steps you're doing, like some other plugins you are installing, but these are the basic steps which is there, like a minimum pipeline if you want to design. These are the steps which is available there. Now let's see. The first one is that we have to require a Java JDK, like a JDK to be available on the system. Now most of the operating systems are already available with a GRE, like a Java GRE. But the problem with the GRE is that it's only for the build process. It will not be doing the compilation. You can run the artifacts, you can run the jar files, you can run the application, run the code base, but the compilation requires the Java C or the Java JDK kit to be installed onto the system. And that's the reason why for this one we also require the JDK. And certain Linux commands execution understanding we need to have, because we are going to run some kind of steps, some installation steps and process, so that's pretty much required. Now let's talk about how to CI/CD pipeline with Jenkins. Now first of all, you have to download the JDK, and that is something which is installed. So after that you can go for the Jenkins download. Now jenkins.io/download is the official websites of Jenkins. Now the best part is that there you have the support for different operating systems and platforms. From there, you can easily say that if you want to go for a Java package like a war file, Docker, Ubuntu, Debian, CentOS, Fedora, Red Hat, Windows, OpenSUSE, FreeBSD, Ganto, Mac operating system. In fact, whatever the different kind of artifacts or different environment or different application you want to download, you will be able to do that. So that's the very first thing to start upon. You download the generic Java package like a war file, then you have to execute it. You have to download that into a specific folder structure. Let's say that you have created a folder called Jenkins. Now you have to go into that Jenkins folder with the help of cd command, and there you have to run the command called java-jar and the jenkins.var there. So these are the executables artifacts. So war files can be easily executable. Jar files, war files can be easily deployed. So just because with the Java command you can run them, you don't require any kind of web container or application container as such. So here also you can see that we are running the Java command and it runs the applications as such. And once that is done, so you can open the web browser and you can open like localhost colon 880. So Jenkins uses the 880 port just like a Tomcat Apache. So if once the deployment is done, installation is done, so you can just open the localhost colon 880. Now if you want to get the Jenkins up and running in the browser, probably you can go through the public IP address also there. So you can put the public IP address colon 880, and that can also help you to start accessing the Jenkins application. Now in there you will be having an option called create new jobs, so you need to click on that. Now once the particular new job, new item, new job, that's a different naming conventions which is available there. Now all you are going to do is that you're going to do like you are proceeding with creating the pipeline job. So you will be having an option called pipeline job over there. Just select that and provide your custom name, what pipeline name or job name you want to refer or you want to process there. Now once that is available, so what happens that it will be an easy task for us to see that how exactly we can go ahead and we can perform on that part. So this can really help us to see that how a pipeline job can be created and performed on these modifications as such. Now when the pipeline is selected, and we can give a particular name, that is, this is the name which is available, and then we can say okay as such over there. Now you can scroll down and find the pipeline section. So there what happens that when you go over there and say that okay, this is the way that how the pipelines are managed and those kind of things. So you will scroll down and find the pipeline section and go with that pipeline script. Now when you select that option, there are different options which is available, like how you want to manage these pipelines. Now you are have the direct access also, like if you want to directly create a pipeline script, you can do that. If you feel that you want to manage, like you want to retrieve the Jenkins files, also a code management tool also can be used there, so you can work on that also. So like this, there are so many a variety of things which is available, like which you can use to work around that how exactly the pipeline job can be created. So either you can fetch it from the source code management tool like Git version or something like that, or you can directly put the pipeline code as such over there, right? Now so next thing is that we can configure and execute a pipeline job with the direct script. So we can, once the pipeline is selected, so you can put the particular script like Jenkins file into your particular GitHub link. So you may be having like already a GitHub link, so that where the Jenkins file is there, so you can make use of that. Now once you process the GitHub link, so what we can do is that we can proceed with that, and once the processing is done, so you can do the save and you can keep the changes, and it will be picking up the pipelines. The pipeline script is added up into the GitHub, and you have already specified that let's just go ahead with this Jenkins file pipeline script from the GitHub repository and proceed further. Now once that is done, so what next you can do is that you can go with the build now process. You click on the build now, and once that is done, so what will happen that you will be able to see that how the build process will be done and how the build will be performed over there. So these are pretty much a kind of a way. So you can click on the console output, you will get all the logs that is happening inside that. Whatever the pipeline steps are getting executed, all of them you will be able to get, or you will be able to get on that part there. So these are the different steps which is involved as such. And the sixth one is that yes, whatever the particular when you run the build now, you will be able to see that source code will be will be checked out and will be downloaded before the build, and you can proceed with that part. Now later on, if you want to change the URL of this GitHub, you can configure the job again, the existing job, and you can change that URL, GitHub link URL, whenever you require. You can also clone this job whenever you go ahead and you work on that, and that's also kind of the best part which is available as such, right? And then you can have the advanced settings over there. So in there you can put like your GitHub repository. You can say like, okay, the GitHub repository is there, so I'm just going to put this URL, and with that, what will happen that the settings will be available there, and the Jenkins file will be downloaded as such. And when you run the build now, you will be able to have a lot of steps, like a lot of configurations going on. So then the checkout SCM, so we can have a declaration like checkout SCM, which is there. So when the checkout SCM is there, so it will check out a specific source code. After that, you go to the log and you will be able to see that each and every stage which is being built up and executed as such. Okay, so now we are going to talk about a demo here. So on the pipeline here, so this is a Jenkins portal. Now you can see here that there is an option called create a job. You can either click on the new item or you can click on the new job, create a job here. Now here I'm going to say like a pipeline, and then you can select the pipeline job type here. Now you have the freestyle pipeline, GitHub organization, multi-branch pipeline. These are the different options which is available there, but I'm going to continue with the pipeline here as such. So when I selected the pipeline and say okay, so what will happen that I will be able to see a configuration page which is related to the pipeline. Now here the very important part is that you have all the general build trigger options which is similar to the freestyle, but the build step and the post build step is completely removed because of the pipeline introduction. Now here you either have the option to put the pipeline script all together. You can also have some particular example. For example, let's talk about some GitHub Maven particular tool here. So you can see that we have got some steps as such over here, and it's pretty much running over there. Now you run it, it will work smoothly, it will check out some source code. But how we are going to integrate like the Jenkins file into the version control system, because that's the ideal approach we should be following when we create a pipeline of a CI/CD. Now I'm going to select a particular pipeline from SCM here, then go with the git here. Now in there, the Jenkins file is the name of the file of the pipeline script, and I'm going to put my repository over here in this one. Now this repository is of my git, which is like having a Maven build pipeline which is available there. It's having some steps related to CI for the build and deployments, and that's what we can follow as such over here. Now in this one, the if it is a private repository, definitely you can add on your credentials, but this is a public repository, a personal repository, so I don't have to put any kind of credentials. But you can always add the credentials with the help of add here, and that can help you to set up whatever the credentials, the private repositories you want to configure. Now once you save the configuration here, now what it's going to do is that it's going to give you a particular page related to build now. If you want to run, if you want to delete the pipeline, if you want to reconfigure the pipeline, all these different options are available there. So we are going to click on the build now here, and when I do that, immediately the pipeline will be downloaded and will be processed. Now you may not be able to get the complete stage view as of now because it's still running. So yeah, you can see that the checkout code is done, then it's going on to the build. Okay, that's one of the steps which is there. Now once the build will be done, so it will continue with the next steps, with the next further steps there. So you can also go to the console output log here, like you can click on this, or you can click on the console output to check the complete log which is happening there. Or in fact, you can also see the stage wise logs also, because that is also very important. When you go for the complete logs, it may have a lot of steps involved, and a lot of logs will be available there. But if you want to see a specific log of a specific stage, that's where this comes into the picture. And as you can see that all the different steps like test cases executions, the SonarQube analysis, the archive artifacts, deployment, and in fact the notification, so all this is a part of a complete pipeline. This whole pipeline is done here, and you get a kind of a stage view, its success over here, and the artifacts is also available to download. So you can download this WAR file, is a web applications, as such over here. So this is what a typical pipeline looks like, that how the automation, the complete automations really looks like as such over here. Now this is a very important aspect because it really helps us to understand that how the pipelines can be configured, can be done, and pretty much with the same steps you will be able to automate any kind of pipelines as such. So that was the demo to build a simple pipeline as such with the Jenkins, and pretty much in this one we understood that how exactly the CI/CD pipelines can be configured, and we can use them and we can get hold on that part. Now in this one we are going to talk about that how exactly we can integrate both the Maven and the Jenkins here, just to implement the CI processes over here. Now what is the purpose of Jenkins here? Now Jenkins is normally a kind of a CI tool which we use for performing the build automations and the test cases automation there. It's one of the open source tool which is available there, and one of the most popular CI tool also available into the market. Now this tool makes it easier for the developers to integrate the changes to the project here. So we can easily integrate the changes, and whatever the modifications we want to manage, we will be able to do that with the help of Jenkins. Now Jenkins also achieves the continuous integration with the help of couple of plugins. Each and every tool which you want to integrate have its own plugins which is available there. For example, you want to integrate Maven, we have a Maven plugin in Jenkins which you can install, you can configure. In that case you will be able to use the Maven there. Now you can deploy the Maven to build tool onto the Jenkins server, and then you can prepare or you can configure any number of Maven jobs in case of Jenkins. So what exactly the Maven or the Jenkins really do is, the Maven when integrates with Jenkins through the particular plugin, so you can able to automate the builds, because for automation the build you require some integration with the Maven, and that integration is what we are getting from the Maven plugin. So in Jenkins you have to install the Maven plugin, and once the plugin is installed, so what you can do is that you can proceed with the configurations, you can proceed with the setup, and this particular plugin can help you to build out some of the Java based projects which is available there in the Git repositories. And once that is done, you will be able to go ahead and you will be able to process a complete integration of Maven within Jenkins. Right, so let's see that how we can go for the integration. Now I have already installed the Maven onto the Linux virtual machine which we are using. So using the apt utility or using the yum utility, you can actually download the Jenkins package and the Maven package onto the server, onto the virtual machine. And now I'm going to proceed further with the plugin installation and the configuration of a Maven project. So I have a GitHub repository which is having a Maven project, Maven source code and the Mavenized test cases over there. So let's log into the Jenkins and see that how it works. So this is the Jenkins interface which we have over here. Now in this one what we can do is that we can create some Maven jobs over here, and once those jobs are created we will be able to do a custom build onto this Jenkins. So first of all we have to install the particular plugin here. For that we have to go to the Manage Jenkins. In Manage Jenkins you have the Manage Plugins option there. So you have to click on that. Now here you will be having different tabs like updates, available, installed, advanced, all these different tabs are available there. So what you can do is that you can click on the available one. When you go to the available tab, so what will happen that here you can actually put up that what exactly plugin you want to fetch here. So I can put up plugin called Maven. Now you can see that the very first one, the Maven integration tool, is available. So I'm going to select that particular plugin and click on download now and install after restart. Now once that is done, so what will happen that the plugin will be downloaded, but in order to reflect the changes we have to do a couple of restart. Now for that you don't have to go to the virtual machine. You have the option here itself that will allow you to do the restart over here when you click on this button. So you check this option and say that restart Jenkins when the installation is done. So what will happen that the installation will be automatically attempted whenever the particular plugin installation is completed here. So you just have to refresh the page again, and you will be able to see that the particular Jenkins is being processed as such here. Right, so you can see that the screen is coming up that Jenkins is restarting. So it will take a couple of 5 to 6 seconds to do the restart and the login screen to come up again over there. You can do the refresh also if you feel. automatically it will be reloaded once the Jenkins is ready, but sometimes we have to refresh it so that we can get the screen over there. So once the login is done, so my Maven integration is done. So next thing which I will be doing is that I will be creating a Maven related project. So I'm going to put the admin user and the password. So whatever the user and password you have created, so you are going to put that so that you will be able to log into the Jenkins portal. Now this is the Jenkins which is available here. So all you have to do is that you have to click on create a new job or new item. So both the option is pretty much same only. So here you will be able to see a Maven project here. So I'm going to select like Maven build. That's the name which I'm going to give here, and the Maven project I'm going to select here and then press OK. Now here you will be providing the first of all the repository from which you will be checking out the source code. Now I can have a discard old builds over here. So if I feel that I want to have like a log rotation, so all the previous builds should be deleted. So I'm just saying that dates to keep build should be 10 over here, and the number of builds which I need to keep over here is 20. You can adjust these settings according to your requirement, but over here we are doing a kind of configurations which we are trying to do a lot of configurations and settings here. So these are the particular settings which we are looking forward as such over here. So now we are going to have the log rotation here. So we can have it like how many days we want to keep and how many number of builds we want to keep here. So both the values we are providing over here. And then now I'm going to put the git integration here, like the repo URL. So I have this repository here in which I have the Java source code and some particular unit test cases, and I also have the particular source code, and it's kind of a Maven project. So that's what I'm trying to clone over here with the help of this plugin. So this plugin will download this repository, it will clone it onto the Jenkins server, and then depending on our integration with Maven, the Maven build will be triggered here. So now I'm going to process with the Maven here. So you can see here that it's saying that Jenkins needs to know that where the Maven is installed, because that Maven version it needs to configure, it needs to process on that part. So I'll just do the save over here, and or I can click on this tool configuration. So I'll just save or do the apply, click on this tool configuration here. Now here you have the options like where you can have the JDK installation, but what happens that since Jenkins is running there, so JDK is automatically installed. So in the tools configuration you don't have to put the JDK configuration, but at least for the Maven configurations you have to provide that where exactly the Maven is available there. So I'm just saying that Maven 3 I want to process, and the latest Maven Apache web server I want to configure here. So I just want to have I just want to save this setting so that it will be automatically download the latest version Apache 3.6.3 version there, and that same should be utilized over here in this case. Now I'm just going to the Maven build configuration here and click on the configure part. So these git repository is available here, and in the build step it automatically builds up that what Maven environment you want to select. So you see that previously, since I did not configure my Maven environment, so it was throwing an error, but once I have configured that I have to download it during the build process or before the build, that utility should be downloaded. So instead of doing the physical installation of Maven on the server, what I have chosen over here is that I have selected the particular version, like I have selected that particular 3.6.3 version should be installed for the Maven purposes over here. Now once that is done, I'm going to put the particular steps over here. You can have it like clean install, you can have clean compile test, clean test, or test alone you can give. It's just a part of the setup or the goals which you want to configure here. It by default says that pom.xml file is the current one in the current directory you need to refer. You need to pick on that one. What it's up to you only that how you want to configure and how you want to process as such these information. So according to your requirement, you can say that okay, I just want to go for these particular goals, and you can say like save over here. The particular configuration will be saved. Now you can just click on the build now, and you will be able to see that the first of all the git clone will happen, and then the desired Maven executable will be the build tool will be configured, and according to that it will be processed here. So you can see here that the Maven is getting downloaded, it's getting configured here, and once it's configured, because I have explained over there that 3.6.3 version I have to select, so that specific version will be configured and will be picked up over here. Now even if you don't have the Maven installed on the physical machine on which the Jenkins is running, still you will be able to do the processing using this particular component here. So you can see here that we have some particular test cases executed, and in the end we are able to get a particular artifacts also there. Since I did not call upon the package or install goal, that's the reason why the particular artifacts was not generated, var file or jar file, whatever the packaging mode is available at form level. But still what happens that my test cases do gets executed, and that's what I have got over here in this case. So this is a kind of a mechanism where we feel that how we can configure a Git repository. Once the Git repository is configured, you are going to integrate the Maven plugin. In the Maven plugin, you are going to configure in the tools configuration that this and so version I want to configure to run my build. And once that is done, after that you just have to trigger the build and click on the build now option, and once that is done, you will be able to get a particular full-fledged build or compilation happened onto the Jenkins. And this log will give you the complete details that what are the different steps which has happened on this one.
So what exactly is Jenkins? Jenkins is nothing but a powerful automation server that is written in Java, and it is a web application which can also be run on any web server. But what makes Jenkins an ideal choice for a continuous integration server? Jenkins has got wonderful plugins that allows it to connect to all kinds of tools, software development, deployment, coding, build, source code kind of tools. That is what makes Jenkins very, very powerful. From a continuous integration perspective, Jenkins can connect to various source code servers, and it has also got plugins that allows it to build, deploy, test all kinds of software artifacts. So this is what makes Jenkins an ideal choice for a continuous integration server. But mind you, for me, Jenkins is nothing but a very, very powerful automated server. At the heart of it, there's a lot of automation in it, but the powerfulness of Jenkins is more so because of the tools that it integrates with and the kind of plugins that it has got. What is continuous integration? From a software development lifecycle, assuming that the software delivery is happening in very small sprints, maybe 3 to 4 weeks is your delivery lifecycle, and there are a bunch of developers who are located in different locations who are working on the same code base, on the same branch. If the code check-ins do not happen quickly, as in every day, if at all developers stagger their code check-ins into the repository, finding problems at a later stage would be very costly for the whole project. Early detection of any such issues would be, quick to resolve and would not affect your delivery schedules. So, as a part of continuous integration, what is requested or what is demanded is that every developer checks in code pretty much, every day. As long as it doesn't break the code, he checks in code pretty much regularly. And at the end of a day, you have an automated server which kind of wakes up, pulls the latest code. So this code has got the integrations of all the code bases that has been checked in by various developers. So it pulls out the code, it builds on a completely different server. That is the CI server, which pulls this code, it builds it. It's got all the tools that is required to compile it, build it, and test it. And assuming that you got some good percentage of test case automation, you're also having most of your regression test suites automated. If at all there is a way by which in a couple of hours time when the team is out or rather the team is sleeping, you have verification that happens at a very crucial level, and then any breakages even before the team arrives for the next day, if these are notified to the whole team members, saying an email going out saying that something got broken, most of the code would be pretty okay from the perspective of compilation errors or build errors. It is the functionality and the regression that the team is worried about. So if these can be automated, tested very, very quickly and very, very fast, and then any breakages are detected early during the day. Right, by the time the next day people come in, they know what is broken and possibly they know what code check-in broke that particular thing, and they can have a quick stand-up meeting and then they discuss what broke the code and able to fix it. So this way, any problem that could possibly arise at a later point in time, if at all they kind of move to the initial phase of the project, any detection that is early doesn't really hurt the team. So this is all continuous integration that is about, and Jenkins plays an important role in being the continuous integration server because it's got connections to anything and everything, all kinds of tools, I mean, and then it has also got various ways on which triggering the job, which is a part of its automation strategy. Now that we know what is continuous integration and where does Jenkins come into picture, let's look at the rest of the tasks of our software development lifecycle. So if at all I were to visualize the kind of steps that is involved in delivering my software, possibly the continuous integration phase would be somewhere here where multiple developers are developing on that. And then we have a little bit of a stable code that is there that can be kind of moved across because I want to go ahead with the particular build that I have, and then I want to migrate that, I want to propagate that across various environments. So if you consider the standard software delivery approach, in the first cycle, you just do some minimal testing. And then you kind of move that to one of the environments. And from there, you kick off more and more tests. They could be integration test, they could be acceptance test, they could be functionality check, they could be a stress test, they could be a load test, there could be a system integration test, all kinds of tests that you can think about. And all the way maybe propagating the build across various environments. If all this can be considered as various steps, the workflow is such that as and when the build moves across various phases, if there's any failure, of course, the build propagation kind of stops. Everyone gets notified. But if at all everything goes well, so your workflow is progressing well, and at the end of the workflow, you eventually have a code which is pretty much good to release. Now, mind you, I make an assumption here that most of your test cases are automated and you have a good percentage of coverage of your test cases. But if that is not the scenario, then possibly there are some automated tests or checks that may be required in between. But if the workflow can kind of accommodate all that as well, you can visualize this as the steps that is required for your software development or software delivery lifecycle. Now in Jenkins, the way this kind of translates is that each of these tasks can be put out as a job. So now let me quickly let you know, or let me quickly demo what existed in pre-Jenkins 2.0, where I could put up a couple of jobs and I can connect them using the upstream downstream linking mechanism. So if this job 1, if at all it is a build and unit test cases, if at all that passes successfully, job 2 gets triggered. If the job 2 is more about running some more automated tests or possibly deploying it to environment and then kicking off some more test cases, that would be job 2. But if the deployment fails or if some of the other test cases fail, it would not propagate to the third job. All right, so let me quickly bring up my Jenkins instance and put up some sample jobs and tell you how to connect that, or rather how would one connect that using Jenkins 2.0 or pre-Jenkins 2.0 release. I have now brought up my Jenkins instance, and in case some of you don't know how to install Jenkins or you don't know how to bring up your Jenkins instance, I would strongly recommend that you watch our previous videos on Simplilearn YouTube channel, where I've detailed out the steps that is required for you to install Jenkins and bring it up. So alright, so I've brought up my Jenkins instance. Let me put up few of those jobs now. Mind you, I'm going to cover the pre-Jenkins 2.0 feature here. Alright, so let me put up my first job. Alright, I hope I don't have that job. I say it's a freestyle project. I don't want to change anything. I'm going to put up a very simple job here. It's in batch command. I say echo first job triggered at. Alright, that's my first job. Now let me put up my second job. It's a freestyle project. All right, that's my second job. All right, that's my third job. I've got a very simple echo statements in this. So it just prints out the system date and the time in it. All right, so I could run these jobs individually if I want. So let me just check running my third job. So this is what I get in the console output. Third job triggered at date and time. Oops. Let me fix that. All right, that should fix it. Let me check my second job. All right, that's my second job. All right, so I've got 3 jobs. Now, if I were to link them together, or if at all I want a scenario where after the first job is successfully run, I would like to trigger my second job. So I would do a small configuration change in here. I would say after this first job is run, I want to trigger the second job. So I have something called as a post build action. So I can say that trigger some other jobs from here. So if you see this, publish, record, deploy, all right, trigger. Let me check the other one. Build other projects. This is what I would want to do. So after the first job is done, I want to trigger my second job. All right, I would say save this. Now let me go back to my second job and then trigger the third job after the second job is done. All right, I will add this post build other projects, third job. Again, I'm not really sure if you guys noticed this. There is various configurations as to when exactly do you want to trigger the other job. And the default one is trigger only if the build is stable. So typically this is the configuration that would need. We definitely don't want the third job to be triggered in case the second job fails. All right, so this is the combination that I want, or this is the choice that I want, and I save this. Now I have 3 of my jobs. If you see this, the second job, the upstream job is the first job. So let me check this kind of a pipeline. What I've set here is a very, very simple pipeline. So after my first job gets triggered, if I build this guy, right, the second job gets triggered after the first job is built. So if I click on the second job, all right, so the first job was triggered the second job, and after the second job, it is triggering the third job. So this is how first job, second job, and third job were kind of linked. But it's pretty hard to visualize this as to, if I need to see one holistic picture where after the first job, after the second job, after the third job, what was the flow? It's not possible for me to visualize that. That's wherein I install a plugin. So let me go to manage plugins right here. I think I already have it installed. For those of you who don't have it installed, you can go to the available tab and click on that. The plugin is called Delivery Pipeline Plugin. I already have it installed. In case you don't have it installed, you just go to the available, you click on this and say install without restart. This is the plugin that I want you to install. All right, so now we have that plugin installed. So what I want to do is after the plugin is installed, you see something like this. So this is where I would create a new visualization for the pipeline that I've created. So I would say my first pipeline, or I give a name for my visualization. I would say, yes, this upstream, downstream dependencies, this is exactly what I want. And there are a bunch of settings here. I'll not look at any of that now. What I want is, I just want to tell this view that, I can give a name for this. I would give it as Simplilearn pipeline. And what's important is that I specify what is the first job that should be picked up as a part of this pipeline. And the final job is optional because it knows that if the first job is triggering this other jobs, it knows where to end this whole life cycle. So I define a pipeline, I give a name for my component and I initialize that as I give it the first job. So I say, okay, and there you go. This is much better. This gives you a beautiful visualization as to what happened after the first job, second job was run, second job. If I click on any of these, that will in fact take me to that job. All right, there is also one other option, which is pretty good option in my opinion, which is about edit view. Yes, this is where it is. Enable start of a new pipeline build. Let me apply and let me click OK on this. What it gives me is a way in which I can trigger my whole pipeline from here. So if I click on this, there you see the first job getting triggered, the second job is still running. The green means it's all run properly and nicely. The second one is triggered now. The third one, it's still running. All right, so this is the pipeline that existed prior to Jenkins 2.0. This is pretty decent enough, and if you see, there's a one-to-one mapping. But if at all you remember, we could go and add multiple dependencies for the projects that I set in. Just to give an example, let's say if I go to my first job, I can do a configuration here and nothing stops me from triggering multiple jobs after this by giving me a comma. I can trigger multiple jobs here in case if I have to run few things parallelly. This also gives me that option to do that. But having said that, this was the most primitive way in which the jobs were kind of visualized and run prior to Jenkins 2.0. Now, this feature became such an important feature. The users wanted more and more complicated because the pipelines was not a lot complicated. It was not just one job after the other. There were multiple jobs that has to be run. And there is also an introduction of the Jenkins agents where multiple tasks could be parallelly run on different agents. So they wanted to club all of that and the pipeline could have all the such complicated stuff. That's where in post Jenkins 2.0 or in Jenkins 2.0, Jenkins released a version which has got the feature of pipeline which can be written in Groovy scripts. Now, Groovy is wonderful scripting language. It's very, very powerful. Anybody can visualize your pipeline or write your pipeline using programming language. And the point of everything as code, where this whole Groovy script gets into your source code repository. So instead of putting jobs here, and in case my Jenkins kind of fails, there's a crash on my Jenkins, I don't get back these jobs. How do I bring back all these jobs back? So everything as code, that's the DevOps principle. So the pipelines will be written as scripts. That is what I'm going to do in my next exercise. In my previous example, I showed you the crude way, in my opinion, of putting up a Jenkins pipeline. But this is what existed prior to Jenkins 2.0. And now I have post Jenkins 2.0 in terms of my version. Jenkins version is 2.107. So this supports something called as a scripted pipeline, wherein you can write your pipeline in terms of Groovy scripts. No need to put up any jobs here and remember how exactly you put up these individual jobs. You can write a pipeline script in terms of Groovy language. Let me quickly show you a very, very simple and elementary pipeline that I have. This is what a Groovy script would look like. Pipeline, any agent can run this. Stages, there are individual stages that is defined as a subset of these stages. So the first stage is the compile stage, and stage has got some steps in it. You can have multiple steps in it, and once only after all these steps successfully complete, that's wherein the stage gets through perfectly with the pass. So there's a compile a stage, there's a JUnit stage, there's a quality gate stage, there's a deploy stage, and I'm really not doing anything much within this other than echoing some text within each of these stages. And what's interesting is at the end there's something called as a post, which is similar to, or you can kind of equate that to what would be there in a try catch kind of a block. So post always, meaning this would run all the time. Success, only if at all the steps that were above in terms of the stages, they were completed successfully without any failures. So typically you would have your email that is going out here saying that the build is successful and stuff like that. Failure, if something went bad, if any of the step resulted in a failure, this particular block will get executed. Unstable, whenever any build is marked unstable. If at all, only few things that failed within your test run, and you would want to mark the build as unstable. Changed, this is an interesting option. So this compares the present run with the previous run, and if there's any change, meaning if the previous run was a failure and the present run is a success or vice versa, this would get triggered. So this is what a simple pipeline script would look like. So let me copy this pipeline and let me put up a simple job for running this pipeline. So let me open up my Jenkins, say a new, I would say scripted pipeline. Yeah, this is what I want. I don't want to choose a freestyle project. This is going to be a pipeline project. So I would say pipeline and say okay. All right, this has got far less options than the other jobs that we put up. So general, I don't want anything here. I don't want any build trigger. Right. So this is where I can paste in whatever I had copied. There's also something called as a pipeline syntax or a syntax generator. This is like a lookup where you can choose what you want to do and choose the option that is specific to those steps, and you will get a pipeline generated or a script generated for you. Jenkins knows that you're not very good at understanding these pipelines, so this gives you this sandbox kind of an environment where you can check out whatever you want to do as a part of your pipeline and then get the equivalent Groovy script from here. Let me look at this in a bit later. So for now, I have my pipeline syntax already copied. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste what I copied. All right, so this looks good. Okay, I'm not connecting to any GitHub repository of any of that. I'm just running a very, very simple pipeline which has got some steps in it, and it just compiles, or rather it just puts out some messages saying that this stage completed successfully and stuff like that. So let me save this and let me try to run this scripted pipeline. All right, if you see this, you would see each of those steps going through, and if at all I look at the console output, compile successfully, unit passed, all the stages passed, there was a pass, the failures doesn't show up. You would see the messages from our post or the try catch block that I was mentioning earlier. So this is how one would put up a pipeline, and you also get to see the visualized view of your pipeline that says which stage run after which phase, how much time did it take, and you can click on any of these and get into looking at the logs from that particular pipeline run. That was pretty easy, wasn't it? Now let me give you another scenario for a pipeline wherein the source code of my pipeline would be in a GitHub repository, and I will write scripts to grab this particular code and run some part of the code which is there as a part of the repository. So let me look at the repository that I have. I have a repository out here on the Simplilearn GitHub account, which is called the pipeline script. And if you see in there, there are a bunch of batch files that are there. So the first batch file would be a build.batch. So there's nothing in it except that it is just trying to build a particular project. You can visualize this as individual batch files, which actually contain the scripts for building, running, deploying, and checking the quality gate of your particular project. So I have a couple of batch files that is here, and this is on the GitHub repository. So I would need to write Jenkins job, which will log into my GitHub account, and then check out this particular repository from my account, and then run these batch files as a part of those individual steps within the scripted pipeline. So let me check as to how I could do that. Let me put up a new project for this. Let me call this scripted pipeline from GitHub. All right, so let this be a pipeline project. That's good enough for me. Let me see my scripts. All right, now this is where I need to put in the scripts for pulling out the code repository from my GitHub server and running those batch files that are there as a part of the repository. So what I want to do is I already have the skeleton of my pipeline that is written, which is very similar to whatever was the pipeline syntax that I showed you in the previous step. So I just copy this out here and then paste it here. So what I have here is I've written on the high level skeleton without really putting in the actual steps required for checking out rather running those build scripts. So I've got 4 steps. One is the git checkout step, the build step, unit test, quality gate, and possibly the deploy. All right, so I need to put in the actual scripts that is required for first checking out the repository from my GitHub server. So this is where I will make use of this pipeline syntax. So as I mentioned earlier, you have a bunch of help that is available for you to figure out the actual scripts that is required for you to write within your pipeline. So what I wanted to do is check out something from Git. So it's Git related. So search on Git and you'll find this option. So I got to specify my Git repository URL and my credentials. So let me look at the repository URL. This would be my repository URL. So let me copy this. I'm going to copy the HTTPS URL of my repository, and branch is good. And one thing that you got to notice is for now the repository is anyway a public repository on GitHub. So even though if I don't specify any credentials, that would work for me still. But in case you have a repository which needs strictly a username and password to be specified, you can kind of add it out here using add Jenkins, and you can give your username and password out here. But for now I don't need any of these things. So I'm going to just say git checkout, or rather the URL of my repository, and what we want is the master branch. For now I have only one branch on my GitHub server, so this is good for me. So this is what exactly I want to do as a part of the script. So if I click this is the script that I need to put in my build script. So I come over here and this is what will check out the code from my repository. All right, so now once I get my code onto my repository, from my repository rather, it will grab those code, all these batch files, and get it onto my Jenkins workspace. Now I'll have to run these batch files as a part of each of my steps. So let me look at what would be the syntax. So the first one that I want to run would be my build.bat. All right, so I want to run a batch file. All right, and what is the name of the batch file that I want to run? I want to run this build.bat. So generate pipeline script. This is all that I got to specify as a part of my build step. And then unit test, I've got to just change this to unit. I think that's what I have in my repository. Okay, that is unit. And then deploy and quality. Q capital quality, and this one would be deploy. All right, so this piece of code will actually get into my repository and check out my source code and grab it and take it to the Jenkins workspace. So from this workspace, since all the files are there in the root directory of this workspace, it will run these batch files one after the other. All right, let me save this and let me try to run my pipeline. All right, so it runs a lot of things in the background trying to get the source code from my repository. Whoa, that was fast. All right, so it pulled out all the source code from my repository. The last commit message from where the source code was pulled out was this create deploy.bat. That looks good. I'm saying building checked out project, building the checked out project, this is what I had in my build.bat if I'm not mistaken. Okay, building the project, that's what is there with the timestamp, running unit test cases, unit.bat, it is running the unit.bat, and then giving me the date and timestamp. Okay, so all these kind of passed, and if I go back to the project, I will also see this beautiful view of how exactly, what is the time that was taken for checking out the repository, running the build.bat, running the unit test cases, quality gates, and all this. Isn't that pretty simple? Now let me modify my previous job, or rather let me put up a new job for making use of an agent wherein I could delegate a job to an agent. Typically, agents can be brought up on any other remote machines other than where your primary Jenkins server is running. In case you don't know or you don't know how to start up these agents, I would strongly recommend that you refer to our previous Jenkins video on the Simplilearn YouTube channel. Alright, so let me just check the status of my agent for now. Yes, he's offline. So let me start this agent because agent is not running. So I have the agent set up in my Simplilearn agents. So let me copy the script file that is required for starting my agent. Let me go to the agents folder, open up a command prompt, and let me try to bring up my agent. Alright, so the agent is up and running. For now, I don't have the luxury of starting my agent on a different machine. So my agent is running on the same machine, but the agent's workspace is SQL agent, while my primary Jenkins server is running, has the workspace out here, SQL program files 86, and this is the workspace of my Jenkins. Alright, I hope you can kind of differentiate those two. Alright, so now what I want is I will look at the same job that I put in earlier, or rather modify that. Let the steps be the same, but I don't want to run that on my master server. Let me try to delegate that using the script. So let me put up an agent scripted job. Alright, it will be a pipeline rep job. I would say okay. And let me copy. This was a step that I had put in for my previous job. So agent any. So what I'm going to do now is I don't want this to be running on any other agent. I want this to be running on the agent whose label is, let me check what is the label of my agent that is running. Okay, so this is the name of my agent. Okay, Windows node. So let me just copy that there. Alright, so with a very subtle change, instead of saying agent any, I'm going to run, or rather I'm going to specify the agent who will be running this job is the one who has got the label as Windows node. So this agent that I brought on my system has got the name as Windows node, and it is configured to pick up any job that matches the label to which any job is kind of delegated. So let me come back to my jobs. Where is my scripted agent job? I've got too many jobs running. Alright, so this is my agent scripted job that I left halfway through. So here in the pipeline, what I'm going to do is this is all I'm going to need. So the job remains the same. Git checkout is going to check out from the same repository, run the batch files accordingly, but this change is just to ensure that this job is kind of delegated on the agent. Alright, so this would be my agent job. Let me save this. Let me get back to the dashboard and let me run it from here. If you see this, the master and agent are both idle as of now. Let me try to run this agent scripted job. Alright, so the agent kind of kicked in and there was a job that was delegated to the agent. If I look at what is there in the console output, he's pretty much doing whatever was there as a part of the job. But the interesting thing to note is that this is the new workspace, or rather this is delegated to the agent, and the agent's workspace is this particular folder. So this is where it's going to get all this stuff, run the whole thing, and the flow is pretty much the same. The only thing is this whole thing ran on the agent. If I need to check my agent, I would see the workspace out here, agent scripted job. If you look at this, all the batch files are here, and this is where the job was kind of delegated to run. So with a very subtle change in the scripting, I can ensure that the jobs are kind of delegated onto the agent, the pipeline job specifically. As I mentioned earlier, Jenkins provides you two different ways of writing pipelines, called the scripted and the declarative. The first one that was launched was the scripted pipeline. This is heavily based on Groovy scripting. since Jenkins ships along with the Groovy engine. So this was the first script or the first support for pipeline that was provided by Jenkins in 2.0. This needs a little bit of a learning curve since Groovy is a wonderful script. Understanding that may be a little cumbersome. But then once you kind of master it, you can write really powerful scripts based on Groovy. At a very high level, this is what a typical scripted pipeline would look like. Something called as a node. Node represents the agent or the actual box on which your job would be running. And then a bunch of stages are put out, which each of the stage along with the steps that needs to be covered as the part of those stages listed one below the other. So all these stages, if they run peacefully, then the whole task is kind of marked as run successfully. Since understanding Groovy or learning Groovy was a little tough for many of the people, so this is a new one from Jenkins wherein it provides you a much simple and friendly syntax for writing pipelines without really needing to understand or without really needing to learn some Groovy scripting. Again, there's a very subtle change between these, and there are a lot of lookups for figuring out what is a better pipeline for you to kind of write. But if you can figure out the difference, or if you can try to find that particular piece of code which kind of helps you out with your pipeline, either of the scripts, there's not really any difference in writing or kind of delivering your pipeline using either of these two methods. All right, so declarative pipeline is something like this where you have an agent. You can specify the agent label, or if you can say agent any, it will pick up whatever is an available agent and run the job. And then you have something called as stages. Stages is nothing but a collection of stage, and stage could have multiple steps defined within this. So if any of the steps in any of the stage fails, then that particular complete stage and the build is marked as failure. So very subtle difference between both these two syntax, but using either of these you can write powerful scripts for your pipeline. Now let me come up with an example where I'm going to at least demo one of the feature where you could run a master and a slave job in parallel. So let me come up with a demo for that particular scenario. Let me put up a new job for my parallel agent pipeline. Let me call this, and this would be a pipeline project. I don't want anything here. Let me look at the pipeline script that I have. Pipeline agent none stages, and there's a first stage where this would be a kind of non-parallel stage where there's a need for you to possibly pull out the source code from one of the repositories and possibly unit test it. If all the unit test cases pass, then possibly you want to deploy it to one of the test environments. That would be what would be there as a part of the non-parallel stage. And then you may have a bunch of tests that could be run. And assuming that you have a Windows node, you have a Linux node, you have some other kind of an operating system based node, you could run these stages in parallel. So just for demonstration, I've just put in two parallel stages. In parallel is the keyword that you're going to use for running tests parallelly. So I would say parallel stage test on Windows, and I'm going to run this in my Windows node. Well, I could run a bunch of steps that I want out here, and then in the other stage or other step, what I want is I will run something else on my master. As long as this parallel keyword is encountered, Jenkins will ensure that these two stages are run parallelly. For now, I have both these things running on my same machine, but assuming that these were running on different boxes, you could kind of visualize it as these two steps are going to be started parallelly without really any dependency on each other. And then you could wait for the test results, and then based upon whether both of these steps passed or failed, if one of them failed, then we could kind of mark the build accordingly. So let me copy this pretty simple script. Let me put this out here, and let me save this out, and let me try to build this. All right, there you go. This stage will be executed first. This is the non-parallel stage that's going to happen. Then the task 1 on agent, task 1 on master, followed by, as I said, since I have only one node, or rather one system on which both these things are running simultaneously, you would not really see a benefit of this. But assuming that you have a couple of boxes on which you have multiple agents running, you will possibly want to run your Selenium tests on the Windows box, because Selenium brings up some of those UI which needs a browser. You could possibly need some regression tests that could run on Linux boxes or Linux agents. And then you can kind of break down your tasks into multiple things that is running on multiple systems at the same time, and then collate all the results. Okay, one final thing. All right, now I have all my particular job, or rather the steps required for my pipeline put down in terms of the scripts, and this is saved in this particular job. That's not a good or a recommended approach. So what I'll do is I'll copy all of these steps out here, and then what needs to be done is actually, let's say, let me go back to this repository. The most preferred approach is where you create something called as a Jenkins file, and you paste all the scripts that is required for your pipeline. Now this is in a true sense the DevOps approach, where I'm going to save this out. So if at all you have a pipeline defined for your project, the best place to kind of put out your configurations for the pipeline is within your repository. So this may be a different project that I was referring to, but assuming that you have your project where you have to define your pipeline, instead of putting that as a particular job on Jenkins and fearing that if Jenkins fails or the jobs, there's a crash and then you lose out your job configuration, the best approach is to use a Jenkins file. Put all the steps that is required, the tried tested steps that is required as a part of your Jenkins file, and then you can put out a job that can pull the source code from here as well as use the steps that is defined in the Jenkins file. So let me end up by putting up another job, which is a true DevOps kind of a job. So I would say DevOps pipeline, and this is a pipeline script. And then I'm not going to say any of these things. I would say the pipeline script is from the source code management. So my pipeline script is already defined. It is present in SCM. So what is my SVN? I mean, what is my source code repository? This is my source code repository where I already have this. So let me copy this URL. This is my URL. I don't need any credentials because the repository is anyway in public repository. That is all that is required, I would say. And the scripted file, it automatically picks up Jenkins file. All right, so let me save this. Let me build this. So that's the beauty of DevOps, wherein I have a pipeline that is defined, and instead of putting the pipeline as a job, because pipeline is nothing but a configuration, the configuration is also checked into the source code repository, and any changes to this pipeline, instead of putting that modifications in the job, these are all captured as a part of my repository. So the changes are nicely configured so that we know who's done what change.
So the first question you'll be asked about with Jenkins is explain a master-slave architecture of Jenkins. So the way that Jenkins is set up is that the Jenkins master will pull code from your remote Git repository such as GitHub and will check that repository every time there is a code commit. It will distribute the workload of that code and the tests that need to be applied to that code to all of the Jenkins slaves. And then on request, the Jenkins master and the slaves will then carry out all the builds and tests to be able to produce test reports. The next question you'll be asked is, what is a Jenkins file? And simply put, a Jenkins file is a text file that has a definition of the Jenkins pipeline and is checked into a source code repository. And this really allows for three distinct things to happen. One, it allows for a code review and iteration of the pipeline. It permits an audit trail for that pipeline, and also provides a single source of truth for the pipeline, which can be viewed and edited. So which of the following commands runs Jenkins from the command line? Is it java-jar jenkins.war, java-war jenkins.jar, java-jar jenkins.jar, java-war jenkins.war? And the answer is A, java-jar jenkins.war. So when working with Jenkins, you're going to be asked what are the key concepts and aspects of working with a Jenkins pipeline. And you want to really hold out your fingers here and go through 4 key areas, and that is pipeline, node, step, and stage. So pipeline refers to the user-defined model of a CD continuous delivery pipeline. Node are the machines which are part of that Jenkins environment within the pipeline. Step is a single task that tells Jenkins what to do at that particular point in time. And then finally, stage defines a conceptually distinct subset of tasks performed through the entire pipeline. And tasks could be build, test, and deploy. So which of the following file is used to define dependency in Maven? And do we have A, build.xml, B, pom.xml, C, dependency.xml, or D, version.xml? And the answer is pom.xml. Working with Jenkins, you're going to be asked to explain the two types of pipeline used in Jenkins along with the syntax. And so a scripted pipeline is based on GroovyScript as their domain-specific language for Jenkins. And there are one or more node blocks that are used throughout the entire pipeline. On the left-hand side, you can actually see what the actual script would look like, and the right-hand side shows what the actual declaration for each section of that script would be. The second type of Jenkins pipeline is a declarative pipeline. And a declarative pipeline provides a simple and a friendly syntax to define what the pipeline should look like. And then you can actually, at this point, use an example to actually break out how blocks are used to define the work completed in a declarative pipeline. So how do you create a copy and backup of Jenkins? Well, to create a backup, periodically back up Jenkins to your Jenkins home directory, and then create a copy of that directory. It's really as simple as that. The question you'll be asked as well is, how can you copy Jenkins from one server to another? Well, there are three ways to do that. One is you can move a job from one installation of Jenkins to another by copying the corresponding job directory. The second would be to create a copy of an existing job directory and making a clone of that job directory but with a different name. And the third is to rename an existing job by renaming a directory. So security is fundamental to all the work that we do within DevOps, and Jenkins provides the center core to all the work that gets completed within a DevOps environment. There are three ways in which you can apply security to authenticate users effectively. And when you are asked about this question of security within Jenkins, the three responses you want to be able to provide is A, Jenkins has its own internal database that uses secured user data and user credentials. B is you can use a LDAP or lightweight directory access protocol server to be able to authenticate Jenkins users. Or C, you can actually configure Jenkins to authenticate by using such as OAuth, which is a more modern method of being able to authenticate users. You're going to be asked how to deploy a custom build of a core plugin within Jenkins. And essentially, the 4 steps that you want to go through are, first of all, copying the .hpi plugin file into the Jenkins home plugins subdirectory. You want to remove the plugin's development directory if there is one. You want to create an empty file called plugin.hpi.pinned. And once you've completed these 3 steps, restart Jenkins and your custom build plugin should be available. How can you temporarily turn off Jenkins security if the administrative user has locked themselves out of the admin console? Well, this doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's good to know how you can actually get into Jenkins and be able to resolve the problems of authenticating effectively into the system as an administrator. So when you want to be able to get into a Jenkins environment, what you want to be able to do is locate the config file. You should see that it's set to true, which allows for security to be enabled. If you then change the user security setting to false, security will be disabled, allowing you to make your administrative changes and will not be re-enabled until the next time Jenkins is restarted. So what are the ways in which a build can be scheduled and run in Jenkins? Well, there are 4 ways in which you can identify the way a build can be scheduled or run in Jenkins. The first is when source code management commits new code into the repository. You can run Jenkins at that point. The second can be after the completion of other builds. So maybe you have multiple builds in your project that are dependent on each other, and when so many other builds have been executed, then you can have Jenkins run. You can schedule builds to run at a specified time. So you may have nightly builds of your code that illustrate the changes in the solution you're building. And then finally, you also can manually build an environment on request. Occasionally, you will want to also restart Jenkins. And so it's good that when a question around how do you restart Jenkins manually comes up, that you have the answers. And there are 2 ways in which you can do it. One is you can force a restart without waiting for builds to complete by using the Jenkins URL that you have for your environment /restart, or you can allow all running builds to complete before restart are required, and in which case you would use the command of the URL for your Jenkins environment /safe restart.
And with that, we have reached the end of this session on Jenkins full course. Should you need any assistance, PPT, project code, GitHub links, and other resources used in this session, please let us know in the comment section below, and our team of experts will be more than happy to resolve all your queries at the earliest. Until next time, thank you for watching and stay tuned for more from Simplilearn.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.